Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Canada Today. I'm your host, Taha Ghayur, once again on Muslim Network TV. Thomas Edison once said, "There is a way to do it better. So find it." Well, this is exactly what our guest today, special guest today, has done. He has looked into something quite mundane and something that is abundant in the world out there, but we rarely think about utilizing things like that, things that we take for granted, to change the world and change our lifestyle. Today, we're joined by an inspiring Muslim professional whose passion for community development and community empowerment has led him to a creative idea of meeting the needs of neighborhoods in rural areas around the world without compromising the future of our future generations to meet their own needs. As Jamie Notter once said, innovation is change that unlocks new value. And here to talk about this, we have with us somebody who has, who has used, as I mentioned, something unique, something mundane, something unique. And we're talking about a unique renewable energy organization leader called Shift, and the leader himself, who is with us, his name is Fahad Tariq. Fahad is an award-winning social enterprise leader. He's the founder and CEO of Shift, a not-for-profit that converts animal waste into reliable, inexpensive energy in developing countries. So yes, we are talking about animal waste. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it poop, mashallah, whatever it is. You have done an amazing job converting that into something that is so valuable, especially in those parts of the world where they don't have access, things that we take for granted. Fahad's day's job is on the Bay Street as an equity research analyst at Credit Suisse, where he covers materials stocks. Fahad has received a number of esteemed accolades for his professional success as well as community work. He's also a frequent speaker on social enterprise and renewable energy. Fahad holds a Bachelor's of Commerce from the University of Toronto and his Master's from the Ivy Business School at Western University. And he currently works as a chartered accountant. So thank you, Fahad, for taking time out of your work today and being with us to share your story.
Happy to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. Well, before we dive, into the discussion about this phenomenal sustainable energy project, tell us your life story. Tell us a bit about who you are in your own words, and what are some of the maybe highlights of your life that you may want to share with our audience today?
Yeah, no, for sure. Wow. So where to begin? So I actually was born in Kuwait during the time when the Gulf War was happening. So soon after I was born, the Gulf War happened, and our family actually had to leave Kuwait, and we went to Pakistan. So I lived there for a little bit, then lived in Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates for a number of years, and then I came to Canada when I was 7 years old. So before the time I was 10, I actually lived in 4 countries, which, it's sometimes it's hard to think about which experiences shape you. But I would say, growing up in multiple countries and, being exposed to different cultures, and also having that mindset of being introduced to a new environment and then having to learn the language or the customs or the school system, that builds a lot of resilience as well. And also opens you up to having that global mindset, which we can talk a little bit about. But, then we came to Canada. I've grown up in, the Toronto, Mississauga kind of area my whole life. Went to university here, both for undergraduate and then also my master's degree. When I was deciding what to study in university, a big factor was, of course, I have immigrant parents. I myself am an immigrant, so expectations are, you can become like a doctor, a lawyer, a chartered accountant. The options are very limited. So I pursued a chartered accountant designation. I did that for a number of years. Went back to school, did my MBA. And it was actually during that time that I developed the idea for Shift along with the team. And when we could talk, certainly we could talk about that as well.
Of course.
So that's a bit about me. I currently live just north of Toronto. I have a young family, and yeah, the highlight of my life is my family.
MashaAllah. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that, and it's amazing to hear how even those few years that you lived around the world with your family, helps you shape your vision for the work that you're doing today. And we will talk a little bit about this global perspective in just a moment. For very Canadian centric, and American centric people out there who think the world revolves around us. Well, guess what? The world is actually outside of our countries. The real world is somewhere else.
Absolutely.
So thanks for sharing that, and it's great to hear that. So you're coming from a business and CA background. MashaAllah, you're a professional and you're busy with your professional life, and as you said, your family as well, which is important to you. This is very, very different from this work that Shift is doing, which is, of course, humanitarian and human welfare and human development work. What inspired you to get into something like this, while there are so many out there who really don't have time for anything like this, and it's not even on top of their minds, it's not even a concern for them. So what inspired you to get into something like this?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, I might be the only person on Bay Street that runs a nonprofit on the side, but in any case, I think it comes down to when I was in business school, the way Shift came about was we entered a business competition, and the business competition was on social enterprise, and the problem that we were trying to solve at the time was raising people's income in some unique kind of way. And so at the time, I was really trying to think of, how can you use business principles in a social setting to help uplift people? And one of the ideas that I came across when I was, looking all over, trying to find something really interesting, was this paper by the United Nations on turning human waste into energy, or the energy potential of human waste. That was the title. And I just thought it was such a crazy idea. And when I read it, I had to, check the links to make sure it was a reputable source, that, it wasn't just some crazy person who came up with this idea. And it was, in fact, the United Nations, and they did research on this. They said there's a huge amount of potential in human waste. And so fast forward, we competed in that competition. We made it to the finals, but we didn't end up winning. And, that was a kind of pivotal moment as well. And we can talk about, I think, the importance of failure sometimes in our growth. But in any case, the team graduated, everyone started their careers after the MBA program. But this was something that just kind of stuck with me. The idea seemed really, really interesting. This idea of recycling something that is, as you mentioned in your introduction, very abundant and very mundane, but has so much potential and is everywhere. So that idea really stuck with me. And sometimes when ideas stick with you, that usually means there might be something there, or it's at least worth exploring a bit more. So I started my job, again, continuing my career on Bay Street. And, I think like many young professionals, I felt like there was something missing in my life where, alhamdulillah, I was able to provide for my family. And the work I was doing in my day job was very intellectually stimulating, very interesting, but it wasn't filling something that I wanted to do, which was to have impact and to give back. And I think many young people grapple with this. There aren't many careers where your day job is aligned with impact. For some people, they're lucky that they get to do that. For many people, they don't have that. So they try to find it elsewhere. Sometimes they volunteer, sometimes they donate, sometimes they do other things. But for me, I really wanted to create an organization that had global impact. And so, and there's different catalysts to why people started things. So for me, I continued to work. I was thinking about this. It was still bothering me that I wasn't doing something to have impact and to help people and to have that kind of meaningful, part of my life. And then one of the things that I got in the mail, which I had totally forgotten about, but when I was in the MBA program, one of our professors told us to write a letter to ourselves, to our future self. And so we write a letter to our future self before we graduated, and then she would email it to us 1 year after we graduated. Wow. And I wrote the letter, and honestly, I totally forgot about it. I started my job was busy, and then one day, I remember early in the year, I got it in my inbox, and my stomach kind of sank, because I remember I wrote things in there about like having impact and helping people, and I didn't want to open it because I knew that it was gonna bother me. Like I already had those, those feelings of I wanted to do more. And then this letter would really remind me that, look, a year ago, you really wanted to do this. In any case, I opened the letter and I read it, and it was just so overwhelming to hear yourself write it, like speaking to you.
Wow.
That was really powerful. And the next day I started Shift.
Amazing. Wow. Good to hear that story. I mean, that's very inspirational. So I think everybody needs to start writing a letter to them. Read it a year later. You never know what comes out of it.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'll say is we tend to be our harshest critics. And I feel like I was very harsh in the letter because it was like, I hope you're doing this. You better be doing something like this. And, sometimes you need that. You need to push yourself. But I also think sometimes we're too hard on ourselves. One thing I will say, timing is everything. So for some people, even if there's an idea you have or there's something you want to do, it's just not the right time for other reasons. Maybe you're taking care of someone who's sick in your family, or you're raising a young family, or you're trying to establish your career. All of these things are important and people depend on you. So timing matters. I was fortunate that at that time I was able to start Shift, and so I did.
Alhamdulillah. And what year was that when you launched it?
So this was in 2016.
Okay, so it's been good 4 years. So tell us what is that problem that you are on a mission to solve with Shift?
Yeah, so it's actually two problems that we're trying to solve. Number one, it would be climate change, which we can talk a bit more about. And number two, and maybe less known, is energy insecurity. So I think you and I living here in Canada, it's very hard for us to imagine that there are still many people around the world that don't have access to clean energy. And I'll give you a concrete example. So in Pakistan, there are many villages where people still use, to this day, firewood for cooking and for heating. So you can imagine women in that village would go out, spend hours cutting trees and getting the wood together, bringing it home, and then using it to prepare meals and to have heating at nighttime. Mm-hmm. And that to me sounds crazy in the 21st century that that's still happening, but that's the reality of many people around the world. And I think going back to this idea of a global mindset, I was exposed not to villages, but of course I saw poverty in Pakistan. You can see it on the streets. So you always, when you see something like that, it stays with you. I think many people here, and they're very fortunate to even be in the circumstance that they've never seen anything like that. You read about it now and you can see, but to see it with your own eyes is something different. To talk to those people is something different. And so I always had that perspective of, I know what the reality of people around the world is. It's not my reality right now. I'm very fortunate to be here. So in any case, those are the two problems that we're trying to solve. And in some countries, that second problem is more prevalent than the first one. If you think about countries like Pakistan, India, parts of Africa, the main problem that they care about for a lot of people is getting clean, renewable, reliable energy and inexpensive energy. And climate change falls lower because if you can't prepare a meal or you can't provide heating in your house, you're not really worried as much about climate change. But we're in a position where our solution actually addresses both of those twin problems. And if you take a step back and think about the world and all the problems we're facing, I would argue the two biggest problems are, where do we get reliable energy for everybody, for the 7 billion people that live on this planet? And number two, how do we do that while not destroying our planet? And what Shift is doing is one sliver of that problem, which is there is a huge amount of potential in waste, in animal waste, in human waste, to really convert that into energy. It works. It's an amazing technology. It's inexpensive, and we've proven it in Pakistan, and soon we'll be expanding in other parts of the world as well.
MashaAllah, that's amazing. So walk us through this whole process. I mean, how does this cow dung or cow poo turn into a useful energy? I mean, we're talking about electricity here. We're talking about gas for cooking. I mean, walk us through the steps here, from the energy domes, as you guys call them, and tell us. I mean, sort of help us picture how big those are, and then how does that transform all the way to where it basically leads to?
Yeah, no, good question. And I get asked that very often because people think it's like this magical process that we came up with. But we didn't come up with it. It's a scientifically proven, well-documented chemical process. What we're doing at Shift is bringing that to the world. And, I don't know about you and, some of the listeners and people watching, but how many people actually knew that that was even possible before they learned about Shift or the work that we're doing? Many people that I talked to didn't even think it was possible to turn animal waste into energy. They think it's like, are you sure? Have you done that before? And then I tell them I have. And in any case, so the process in summary is basically if you have animal waste, I'll just use animal waste as an example. If you have animal waste and you put it inside an oxygen-free environment, so like our energy domes, so there's no oxygen in there. What happens is these bacteria start to form and they break down that physical waste. They actually break it down, and from it, from that breakdown, methane gas gets released. And that gas rises to the top of the energy dome, and then it gets piped to people's homes and villages, and then they can turn on a gas stove, and then they can cook their meals. They can provide heating if they want to do that. And then what happens with that physical waste that's built up in the dome is eventually it goes out. It rises and it gets pushed out. And what the farmers do is they take that physical waste and they throw it into the fields as fertilizer. So nothing gets wasted in that process. The waste that came in, you extracted energy from it, and then you also end up using the remainder as nutrient-rich fertilizer. And just to give you, some examples of what it looks like, it's about 10 feet by 10 feet, so it's quite large. Typically, part of it is underground and part of it is above ground. So you can see it. And next to the dome, we have a little area that looks like a well. And that's where the farmers put in the waste. They mix it with some water, and then it goes down into the dome. And then coming out of the other end will just be a pipe. So it's a very simple infrastructure. It's just bricks and mortar, a few PVC pipes, nothing super complicated. I don't have an engineering background but I was able to get my head around it and get a team in place that understood it. So we wanted to make sure it was something that we understood and were able to implement, and also a technology that is simple enough that it actually works in places like Pakistan, in these villages. Because, I think sometimes people think of these super elaborate, technologically advanced solutions, but they would never work in a very rural environment that basically, people don't know how to read and write. It's just, you're surrounded by nothingness. There's no electricity. There's no, gas pipe or anything like that. There's just cows and people. And so you need to have a solution that actually addresses the problems that those people are facing, because you can have a fancy, elaborate, complicated solution, but it'll never work there. And one piece of advice that I was given when we were developing this technology was, try not to have moving parts, because what the sad reality is, people will come and they'll take those parts, because it's not like, you just can't understand the circumstances of the people there. They're so desperate to have money so that they can just put food on the table. So I would never judge people in that circumstance, but it's just a reality on the ground that if you have, for example, a moving part, a battery or something like that, that in those parts of the world, someone will come and take it. And so these are realities that you have to be aware of and work around. And so alhamdulillah, we've been successful. Our solution is very simple. No moving parts, also because of maintenance reasons. So it's basically a dome. It provides the gas. It lasts 50, 100 years because it's just bricks and mortar. And it's a really, really effective solution, very low cost. The projects that we do in Pakistan on average cost about 2,500 Canadian dollars per project. And that's enough for one village. So, a densely populated village in Pakistan is like 30, 40 people. And if you think about how much impact you're having with that one investment, it's a lot. And the fact that there's no maintenance, those domes last 50 years, it's a tremendous amount of impact per dollar invested.
That's phenomenal. And I think there are a couple other, byproducts of this, solution that you have come up with, or this project that you're working on, and I often don't get recognized. I think one of the things that I came across recently is this whole issue of methane gas itself, and apparently, from my understanding of my research, I mean, methane gas could arguably be a bigger problem now in terms of environment, its damage to the environment, as compared to other emissions, gas emissions that everybody in the world talks about. So we don't talk about methane gas, and so from my understanding, based on what you're doing, you're actually helping curb those emissions and actually utilizing it for something that is actually beneficial.
You're absolutely right, and many people don't realize that, because if you talk about emissions, I would say 9 out of 10 people would say carbon dioxide. right? Carbon dioxide. Methane is actually, multiples more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide. And one of the things we don't talk about enough, I think, is in the agricultural industry, when you talk about meat consumption and things like that, one of the reasons why people say it has such an impact on climate is because cows produce a lot of methane, right? And typically, if you think about a scenario in which you don't have an energy dome that's capturing it and burning the methane gas, and it's in the fields, it's going out into the air, that's having a huge amount of impact. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's way more damaging than carbon dioxide, and in fact, the fact that we're able to burn it off and convert it in that chemical process into something less damaging is huge. And so that's a huge part of the climate change discussion as well. So on the one, and so we talked a lot about energy insecurity and that part of the problem, but the other part, the climate change, it's also people aren't chopping down trees for wood. You're providing a renewable source of energy because it's waste that gets decomposed, and then you can, then the cows will keep producing more waste. And to your point, you're capturing methane gas, which is even more damaging than carbon dioxide. So those two things are very important. And look, you're providing them again. If on the off chance they don't use gas, they'll probably, or they don't use firewood, they'll use something that's probably not good for the environment, whether it's like other more traditional forms of energy. Whereas this is something that's clean, it's renewable, and it's capturing those dangerous emissions. But you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't talk about the fact that methane is a lot more damaging than carbon dioxide.
And there is other thing I wanted to highlight that I gleaned from the success of this program is really the local impact and local empowerment that you're doing, empowerment work that you're doing there. Talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, what kind of local empowerment of communities you saw? I mean, you spoke about the fact that instead of coming up with these grand fancy plans that that we all cook up here sitting in our comfort zones, we go there and you actually see, look, these are the resources, you can do this and this and this. But what else have you seen through this process that you felt that was so empowering to the local communities?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of things, and to your point, it's really important to go and see these things. And I know not everyone can do that, but for those who want to work in the nonprofit sector or want to do development work, good luck sitting here and trying to parachute your ideas in another country. You have to go there. You have to talk to people, not only because that's how you'll understand the problem that needs to be solved, but also you won't have any community buy-in if you're not there, or if you don't have a presence in the country. I have never heard of a success story of someone sitting in Toronto, Canada, and trying to run a nonprofit that does work somewhere else without actually going there or having someone there. And we're fortunate that we do both. But yeah, in terms of empowerment, there's a number of things. So first, everything that we use to build the domes is all locally sourced. Number two, the contractors that we use to actually build the domes are local, and they have experience in that kind of development work. Number three, the women who used to go and collect firewood are now empowered because they have far more time to do other things, right? And in some cases, those things are income generating, so they could do some more work. Because again, as far-fetched as it sounds for us, they were spending hours collecting firewood, and now they can spend that time doing things that are more productive, or even just spending time with a family. So they get empowered that way as well. And one of the things I'll say on empowerment, when I went to Pakistan and I visited our first few projects, one of the things I asked everyone I met there was, is this actually solving a problem that you have? Because if it's not, it's not worth your time, and it's not worth my time, and it's not worth the resources that we're putting into it. I want to solve real problems that will change your day-to-day life for the better. And the answer we always got was, this is very, very impactful to us, and it's a huge improvement to how our way of life was before. And so to the extent that that keeps happening, and that's the kind of response we get, we'll keep doing this kind of work, because there are many communities around the world where this is possible. And typically, the way we kind of filter where we're going to do a project is, one, there's no access to kind of traditional source of energy. And number two, it's a rural farming village that has lots of cows, because we need cows to create the input. I'm saying it politely as input, but you know what I mean, to create the poop that we need for the energy. But that's typically, those are the two requirements we look for. So, no access to energy, and then also they have cows on the farm as well.
Well, thanks for sharing all this. Your work actually helped me finally understand what some of the, sometimes you may see it in villages yourself,
Right.
or you can see it on TV. This whole phenomenon of walls being, filled with sort of round, circular, poops, basically,
Right. Yeah.
and drawing on the walls.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, like, what do people do with it? Uh,
Yeah.
but now I fully understand. Of course, I knew that is somehow being used for some form of energy and some use. But I think what you're doing is where it's streamlining the process, and of course,
Right.
making it safer, secure, and really sustainable. That's the most
Yeah,
critical.
yeah, and just one more thing on empowerment. That video you're showing, the promotional video that we did, also that was shot by a local Pakistani film crew, right?
Mhm.
So everything we tried to do was,
It's a good video, actually.
historical, incorporate. First of all, there's immense talent in these countries, and I think sometimes people don't realize how amazing the talent is. If I told you that was produced in Toronto, Canada, most people would probably believe that.
Mhm.
But the talent is amazing. And number two, we wanted to empower people and promote the local economy as well, which I think is really important to the extent that you can do that. And you mentioned, the women in the video, they actually used to put the cow dung on the wall, and they basically dry it and turn it into almost like these like, it's like coal almost. Like it dries and becomes coal, and they can use that. But again, similar to firewood, it's a very time consuming process. And it's not, it's not the best use of their time, and they're also handling, fecal matter with their hands. It's not the best, from a sanitation perspective either. So again, our solution is trying to improve on all of those daily kind of outcomes, that they don't have to do these things anymore. There is a better option available to them.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about your journey and some of your personal sort of, I guess, motivations. I wanted to ask you one question about challenges, and you did mention something about failure. But when you were starting this process and this idea, what kinds of challenges you faced? And were there any naysayers? Were there any, negative voices telling you, what on earth are you doing? Crazy stuff, dealing with some of the, as you said, like, some of the, I don't even want to use some of the words,
Right.
that's out there basically. So, why would you get into something so nasty?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, good
What
question.
were the things that you came across that you had to sort of overcome?
Yeah, good question. I mean, look, lots of challenges. I think if you asked anyone who started a nonprofit or any entrepreneurial venture, there's no shortage of challenges. Right off the bat, time was a huge constraint for me. I kept my day job, so obviously doing something in my quote unquote spare time, time was a huge constraint. Number two, getting a team together. It was very hard to convince other people to also share, your passion for something like this. Is, and founders are typically more passionate than anyone else on the team, and so you want to build a team that's also equally passionate, equally wants to have that impact with that same mindset. So building a team is challenging, especially when you're asking everyone to be a volunteer. And I should mention, everyone working for Shift right now is 100% a volunteer. Our advisory board, management team, everything. So, and that's by design, and we can talk about that as well. But yeah, that was a challenge. And to your point about naysayers, I would say most people were fairly supportive. I think the initial reaction was people would make jokes, right? Like that was the first thing, because it was so easy to make a joke about turning poo into power. So that was the first thing. But the second thing was probably a lot of curiosity. A lot of people wanted to know, like, tell me more. Like I've been at dinner parties where, like, oh, what are you doing in your outside of work? It's like, oh, I'm turning poo into power. It's like, what? Like, can you say that again? And so lots of curiosity, and which is nice. Like that's always good when that's the kind of reaction you're getting from people. So that was really good, but no naysayers per se. Like, some people thought, like, what are you going to do with this? People start asking, like, why are you doing this? You have a job, blah, blah, blah. So I think sometimes, and I don't know if this is necessarily like just the kind of immigrant mentality, but sometimes you have this mindset of you should just focus on your career. You should just focus on establishing your career. And, you're still trying to establish yourself. That phrase comes up a lot from parents, from family, etc.
50 years the same, you still establish yourself, right? So
Yeah, exactly. So And I think we need to get out of that mindset a little bit. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Establishing yourself and then having impact, there you can do both at the same time. You don't have to pick and choose. So that was really that was really something that I had to overcome a little bit. Like my parents were very, very supportive, and they still are to this day. But it was still a conversation where my mom's like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And so you need to have those conversations, but you also need to know that you're passionate about it and push it forward. So those are some of the challenges. Obviously, once we got past the I'm going to do this, we're going to create the entity, we're going to build a team. The challenge of actually doing it, because the reality is I'm here in Toronto, Canada, and we're trying to do something initially in Pakistan, but eventually all over the world. How do we do that? How do we find people that are there? And sometimes these things, just if you have the right intention, I think doors just start opening. So we were very, very fortunate that some people were able to, we it was kind of like cold calling, but we basically tried to get a few people in my extended network to help. They put their hand up, they were able to help, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And I'll just give you an example of just like opening doors. So we're now working on projects in Uganda, Nigeria, and Kenya. And Nigeria and Kenya, the way it came about was literally somebody read about what Shift was doing, and they were from those countries originally. And they emailed me saying, "Hey, I think that's really interesting, and I think there's a huge need in my country, and I know people in this village that could really help, could benefit from that. Would you ever consider doing something in Nigeria or Kenya?" And the answer is always like, yes, as long as it meets those criteria. And so it's just, and otherwise we would have had no kind of way to enter those countries and have impact there. But sometimes these things just happen, and it's fortunate that people learn about it and they actually want to help and they see the potential of it in their own countries.
Amazing. Were there any mentors that you looked up to? Any people who were inspiring, whether it's sometime in your youth, throughout your career, and especially not-for-profit and volunteer work, or it could be work itself, or of course now journey itself to Shift itself. Are there any people that you looked up to who inspire you or did inspire you in the past?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a number of people, and it's so hard sometimes to pinpoint what influenced your life. We were talking earlier about me growing up in multiple countries. I honestly didn't think that would have such a huge impact in the way I thought about things, but it does, because I talked to people who didn't grow up in multiple countries, and it's a different perspective. In terms of inspiration and people who had an impact on me when I was young, and I'm talking about, I'm still young, but when I was younger, one of the books I read was called The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. And he was a professor of computer science, I believe, at Carnegie Mellon, who passed away from cancer. But he did a lecture, and you can find it, I believe, on YouTube as well. But he wrote a book as well. It was basically his last lecture, right? This idea of what would you impart to the world as advice before you pass away, knowing that you're going to pass away. And he knew he was going to pass away, and he had a terminal illness. And his book, I remember I was reading it when I was a teenager, and I actually don't know how I got a hold of it. Maybe I bought it or somebody gave it to me. But in any case, it had a huge impact on me, because it mentioned a lot about, how you shouldn't give up on your childhood dreams. But it did it in a very pragmatic way, where he talks about his childhood dreams, but then he talks about how he was able to accomplish them in a pragmatic kind of way. And I'll give you an example. So he said one of his childhood dreams was to become an astronaut, to go to outer space. And this is a computer science professor, right? So obviously he didn't go into outer space, but one thing he did as sort of like a partway achievement of that goal was he signed up for this science experiment with his class that allowed him to go on this, I forget what the name of the rocket ship is, but it's basically, it's a plane that goes high into the stratosphere, and it allows you to experience zero gravity, but you're not in outer space, but you just go high enough that you can experience weightlessness. So he did that. And so he talks about how that was, a partial achievement of his goal. And he felt like he had, kind of ticked that box off. Another goal he had was he always wanted to, I think he said he wanted to always be an engineer at Disney. Like he wanted to design rides at the Disney World. Obviously, he never got a chance to do that, but he was able to collaborate on some project with one of the Disney movies or something like that. So I think, like, for me, the takeaway from that book was, we all have these childhood dreams, and of course the realities of the world are that we can't always accomplish everything because our childhood dreams are so lofty sometimes. But one, that we shouldn't give up on them, and two, there are ways to get closer to that goal. So although he wasn't able to accomplish fully what he meant when he, kind of thought about his childhood dreams, he was able to do something that came close to that. And that always stuck with me as one, like he never gave up on these lofty, lofty goals. And I tried not to either for myself. And number two, I just thought, if I don't get all the way there in terms of what I want to do, at least I'll get part of the way there and I'll have some sort of impact. And I think a lot of people have this kind of 0 or 100 type of approach. It's very binary. Either I'm going to do it or I'm not going to do it. It's like, well, you can get halfway to your goal and that's still a better point than, 0. So that was very influential growing up. And then, of course, there was a number of community leaders growing up that were very impactful as well. Very early in university, for example, I met someone, you may know him, Hamid Ashur, who currently runs a cricket farm company. But he was someone who, he may not even know this. I don't know if you'll ever watch this, but if he does, he may not know this, but he was someone who was very influential to me. And again, this idea of someone who had this idea of wanting to have impact, and he did it in a very pragmatic, grounded in reality kind of way. And I really looked up to him, and that was very formative as well. So those are probably 2 examples.
Great, very nice. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You're talking about reading, and you're just talking about a book that you specifically read and a lecture you heard. I remember there was another interview where I like the quote you had, which is "Be a learner, or better yet, be a sponge." Just elaborate a little bit on that. I mean, what do you mean by this? I'm assuming you're talking to young people here. You're talking to the idea of growth mindset. So elaborate a little bit on this, if my assumption is correct.
Yeah, so there's a number of psychologists that talk about this idea of growth mindset. I think Carol Dweck is the famous one, but don't quote me on that. But there are psychologists who talk about this idea of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, and it's just the way it sounds. People who have a growth mindset, they're always thinking about improving, learning. People who have a fixed mindset are like, this is who I am. I can't change. These are my circumstances. I can't improve. And so obviously you want to be in the camp of the growth mindset. And I think for me, I haven't, you mentioned role models, and I thought of someone else in the context of reading and learning is, in terms from a Muslim perspective, like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, for example, a very notable reader. And he, I would say he was probably one of those people where looking at him and seeing how much he learned just by reading and how much he was able to retain, that was very influential to me. And it also showed me how much a person can grow and learn and change in their thinking and become more complex in their thinking just by reading. So what I meant by that quote was, first, I think young people should definitely have a growth mindset. And I think a lot of people do nowadays, especially with the all these self-help books and videos and podcasts. But you have to actually follow that up with action, right? And so one of the things I always recommend is, I think reading is a phenomenal hobby. And I wish I could show you my bedside table, but I have probably like 6 books listed there or piled up there. And I always have a pile ready to go, because as soon as I'm done one, I want to make sure there's another one ready. Otherwise, you kind of fall off the wagon. So I think reading is really, really important. But that quote that I mentioned about being a sponge, it doesn't just apply to books. I think you should approach every situation in life as a learning experience. So when you meet someone, when you're doing networking in the context of like a business scenario or in a career perspective, every opportunity should be something that you're trying to learn. You shouldn't ever leave an event or a gala or a dinner without learning something. And if you have that mindset, you will learn so much. And in the context of, from a Muslim experience, one of the things I try to do is, we go obviously to Jummah every Friday. One of the things we should do is imagine if everyone just remembered and applied everything they learned every Friday. Over the course of the year, that's 52 things that you learn, like 52 incremental data points, 52 new habits, for example. It's a lot easier said than done, of course, but it's just the mindset of always try to learn from other people. I always assume that the person I'm talking to knows way more than I do, and most of the time they, almost all the time they know more than I do. And so you always want to learn as much as you can. I think in the form of reading, I think that's really, really important. But also in the context of any person I talk to, I try to learn from their experiences and I try to absorb what they're saying, because especially if they're older, that is really important, because they have lived experiences that you don't. And so I think if you are meeting with someone, and I'll give you an example just in the context of a career perspective. One of the things that's very common on Bay Street, for example, is this idea of coffee chats. You go to coffee chats because you're looking for a job or networking, or you're trying to find out more about a career. But people sometimes they approach it in a very transactional way. Like, I met you for coffee. Now 2 weeks later, please forward my resume to such and such person. But really, if you go with the mindset of genuinely trying to learn about the person, the career, what life is like, et cetera, or learning about the person and their hobbies, that goes a much longer way. And again, if that person is older and has been working for a long time, they have lots and lots of experience that they can share with you. And in fact, they like sharing that experience with you. Many people that I meet, they love talking about, this sounds bad, but they love talking about themselves. They love sharing their experiences. And I think people should be really open to absorbing that as much as possible. And everything you take in, it influences who you are and how you think. And that's a broader philosophical discussion, but I do think people need to have that mindset of whoever I'm talking to, whatever I'm reading, whatever I'm watching, I should be trying to learn something from it that actually impacts my life in a positive way, or helps me help other people in a positive way.
Very practical. Thank you so much for sharing that. So as we conclude, I have a couple more questions to end our discussion today, and we could definitely go on much longer, mashallah. A lot of wisdom to share here. I wanted to ask you, what keeps you going? What keeps you, every morning when you wake up, what sort of motivates you to keep doing this visionary work, considering that, most people out there, as you mentioned yourself, in the corporate world, or even, in life out there, don't have either time or concern for global issues like this. Even local issues, let alone global issues. What keeps you going and keeps you motivated every morning, every week when you do whatever you do, mashallah, with Shift?
I think I can say this for this audience is, of course, is rooted in faith, right? Like a big part of the motivation is, look, at the end of the day, I'm trying to go to Allah with something that I've done that has had impact on people in a positive way, right? And that's the honest answer. And typically when I give these interviews with other outlets, I can't say that because they don't really understand what I'm trying to say. But with you and this audience, I can say that, it's really rooted in faith, and that's a big motivator, of course. The other thing is, and it's hard to put in words, but it's something inside you that, for me, I want to make sure that I can leave the world a better place, and that I can have that positive impact on someone else's life. And there are many, many ways to do that. I'm not trying to suggest that everyone needs to start a nonprofit or that everyone needs to do something huge. But, I think everyone deep down does have that desire of wanting to help other people who are less fortunate. And so there's kind of, the first thing is having that mindset of you want to have an impact and you actually care about some of these problems, which I think a lot of people, because of how much we take in terms of just the overload of these issues that we see, we become desensitized to it. I think Hassan Minhaj, who's a comedian, he had this famous analogy where he said it's like we have an internet browser open with too many tabs, and each tab is like a problem, and we have to close some of these tabs so that we can think properly. I agree. I think we're becoming desensitized because we're just taking in so much. So I think the first part is being more conscious of what you're looking at. Actually stopping to think about, okay, this person is talking about this issue and this petition, and let me think about what that really means, rather than just kind of scrolling past it. So the first is the mindset and the concern. And I do think most people deep down have that concern. I think it just gets buried with the amount of information we take in, which one, desensitizes us, but two, we also feel helpless because it's just so much. So yeah, the mindset is important. I think people do have that concern deep down inside, but they have to learn to actually act on it. And then the second thing is for motivation. For me, I said it was rooted in faith and wanting to have impact. But for other people, it's all sorts of motivations. People want to, they feel like this is the way to happiness, right? For a lot of people, that's their motivation. They think that giving back is the only way they can attain true happiness and contentment, which again is another philosophical discussion. But my point being, people have different motivations.
Yep.
Every person listening to this should think about what works for them.
Absolutely.
Right? What works for me, what gets me up in the morning, is going to be very different than what works for you. Some people I've spoken to, they say, their biggest motivator is their kids. They see their kids and they say, I want to make sure the world is better for them. Or I think about other children that don't have what they have. And I want to make sure that inequality doesn't exist. So everyone has different motivations. You need to, and they definitely exist. You just need to find out what it is that sparks that within you, and then make sure you hold on to that and really, strike when the iron is hot. There are times in our life when we feel really passionate about something. You have to do it then, because if you let that kind of fire extinguish, it's very hard to bring it back sometimes.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
Well, I guess two more things. The one being, in back in 2017, you wrote an article in the Huffington Post, and you gave a tactical advice to those who wanted to make this world a better place. And I thought it was actually very practical, just like everything else so far you've talked about is so practical. You want to share something about that? I mean, for especially those up and coming, aspiring enterprise leaders, or people who just want to do something good for the world. What are the top three things you would suggest to them that they do today?
Yeah, so I mean, the first I would go back to just be a learner, right? Either be a reader or be a learner. And if you're trying to have impact, there's probably nothing that you're coming up with that is unique to you. Someone else has probably tried it or done something similar, or there are other examples. So be a learner, leverage other people's experiences for sure. And you don't always have to start a new organization. There are many, many organizations that exist doing lots of good work. You can always join them and contribute that way. So number one, I would say have that kind of growth mindset, be a learner, be a reader, absorb as much information as you can that is helpful. Number two, I would say, this is very practical advice, but I think it's really important, is just put down technological devices. And this is much easier said than done. It's very, very hard for us to put down, like my phone is right here. It's very hard for us to put it down, but I can guarantee the people who are successful, both from a career perspective, but also having impact, are people who take the time to put that down, have real conversations, and just keep their eyes and ears open to opportunities, right? Opportunities may be flying right past you and you're not noticing because you're just looking down. And the article you mentioned that I wrote, in that I mentioned this specifically, that when I was in Pakistan, for example, and I was driving from one place to another, most people would kind of be on their phones, and I am too sometimes. It's very hard not to be, but I remember when I was there, I was trying to really take everything in, and I looked outside and I saw these heaps of garbage, right, in Karachi, and I kept thinking, there's something that you could probably do something with this. So then I asked one of my friends, like, could you ever turn this into like material that can be used for something, like compact the garbage? And he said, yeah, there's actually a nonprofit that compacts garbage into construction material, right? So, but I would have never even thought of that if I wasn't even looking outside and if I was just looking down. So I think it sounds simple. It's very hard to do. I get it. But, put your phones down and try to look at the opportunities that are around you. Talk to as many people as you can, real conversations, outside of COVID, obviously. And then number three, my advice would be, look, I think you need to think about the timing of these things, and you have to be pragmatic. Impact is something that hopefully is a long-term, something that you're trying to do long-term. If you get the timing wrong in terms of it's not the right time in your personal life, or it's requiring too much time initially, it's not going to work. You're not going to have long-term impact. You'll burn out in a month or two or a year, and then no one's better off because you burned out. So I think timing is really important. You have to be honest with yourself. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but there are times in your life when you have the ability to give back, and you should. And there are other times when there are other priorities, and you should not feel bad at all that you're not doing something at that point, because you're doing something else that's probably more important in your immediate life, whether it's a family member that depends on you, whether you're raising a family. At the end of the day, you need to think about what you'll be held to account for, and be honest about that. So I think a lot of people get it wrong on the timing. I talk to a lot of young people who, for example, they're in like first or second year university, and they're they have a very heavy course load, or they're trying to get into med school or graduate school or something like that. And they're like, I want to start my own organization. It's like, okay, that's actually great, but is it the right time, or is it can you balance the time commitment? And some people can, and that's fantastic, and all the power to them. But a lot of people can't, and I think they just have to be honest about, I care about this particular problem. I want to have a solution, but now is not the right time for me, and that's okay. I can park the idea. I can do something like donate or sign a petition or volunteer on a part-time basis, but I'm not gonna really invest 10, 20, 30 hours a week into this until I'm at a point where I can do that sustainably. So I think that's really important too, just from a practical perspective. So yeah, I would say be a learner, keep your eyes open, put down some of these devices. I think that will help a lot. And number three, just think about, is it the right time for you? And if it's not, that's totally fine, and you shouldn't feel guilty about that at all.
Awesome. That was great. How can people learn more about Shift, and more importantly, how can people support the incredible work you're doing?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning it. So you can go on the website, www.shiftwastenow.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I prefer that as the platform. And in terms of supporting, really, we've been fortunate because people have told their friends and family about it. They've shared articles. They've shared, our crowdfunding campaign we did several years ago that was really, really successful. So if and when we share things like this, or we come out with a fundraising campaign, please do share it. Consider donating, making a small donation. Everything that you donate, 100% of it goes towards the projects. Not even things like the website are covered by donations. That's covered separately. So anything that's donated goes straight to the projects. We're fortunate now that we're in a position that we have an institution, a charity in Canada, top 100 charity, that is providing funding as well. But we're always looking for individual donations as well. So share it on online as much as you can, especially if we come up with some new exciting announcements, which we will. But also donate if you can, and let others know about it. And lastly, I would say, if you are aware of someone who would be a good contact, or a place where you think this could work really well, again, we've always benefited from that kind of response. So if you have someone like that, and everyone has really, really interesting and impressive networks, please do share that with me as well.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you, Fahad, for being with us here today. And I've had the pleasure of knowing you for at least, I think, 10 years, if not more, going back to your leadership role at Muslim Fest. And I remember seeing that potential, mashallah, but never knew what you would be able to where you would be going in life, and what you're going to be accomplishing 4 years ago. And wishing you all the best with amazing inspirational leadership that you're providing at a global level, at a time when most people really don't care about such problems. I'm so happy that we have people like you in Canada. We have Canadian Muslims like you, leaders who are actually having an impact in such an incredible way. So thank you once again for being here with us today, Fahad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Take care. Thank you. Well, that's it for now, folks. We could have talked longer. There's so much we can explore. Amazing inspirational stories, and very practical advice, which is what I really loved about talking to today's change maker. And alhamdulillah, the world is open to you, and you have access to so much out there now to learn and observe and absorb, and inshallah be the next change maker in whatever way and capacity you are able to, inshallah, in your own circles and your own spheres of influence, inshallah. So with that, I wanted to conclude by, first of all, thanking our audience. Please keep sharing your thoughts and your ideas for special guests as well as topics. And thank Dawanet and TorontoMuslim.com for their marketing partnership with us on Canada Today, as well as, of course, our lovely producers who are always working behind the scenes very hard. Sister Aisha Malik, as well as Sister Saliha Farouk. Thank you for your time and contribution as usual. Once again, this is Taha with you on Canada Today on Muslim Network TV, signing off till next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.